"You're nothing without me," said the Millionaire CEO. 5 years later, he saw her with triplets, and she made him regret every word. My beautiful family, welcome back to Mr. Peter's family. May every woman watching be clothed in strength that never fades and peace that never breaks. May the nights that once held pain now cradle your dreams. With divine comfort, may your laughter return louder than your heartbreak, and your hope shine brighter than your past tears. You are not forgotten, not forsaken, not defeated. You are the quiet storm that rebuilds. The sunrise after every dark sky, the prayer that never stopped working. Let every wound become wisdom, and every scar become the story of your victory. My precious family, your voice keeps this space alive, your love builds this home. A like is your light shining in faith, a comment is your heart saying, "I still believe." This is Mission 1000 likes, for every woman who rose from ashes, stood through storms, and still chose love. If you carry grace in your heart, like this video, if you believe in faith after pain, comment, "I'm with Mr. Peter." The pregnancy test burned in Diana Sinclair's pocket like a secret that refused to stay buried. She stood outside Drew Thurman's penthouse office, her reflection staring back from the glass doors, a woman she barely recognized anymore. The city sprawled beneath them, 40 stories of power and height, and she wondered if falling from this elevation would hurt less than what was about to happen. Her hand trembled against the door handle. She had practiced this moment a dozen times in the mirror that morning, rehearsing calm words and steady breathing. But her heart hammered against her ribs like it was trying to escape the cage of her body. She pushed through the doors. Drew stood at the window, his silhouette sharp against the morning light, phone pressed to his ear. He held up one finger without turning around, a gesture that had once seemed endearing in its familiarity, but now felt dismissive. Diana waited, her fingers knotting together, the test still hidden in her blazer pocket. The office smelled of expensive leather and his cologne, scents that had once meant safety to her. Now they made her nauseous. When he finally ended the call and turned to face her, his expression was already impatient. "Diana, I have the board meeting in 20 minutes. Whatever this is, make it quick." She pulled the test from her pocket and placed it on his desk. The two pink lines seemed to glow under the recessed lighting. Drew stared at it, like she had placed a live grenade between them. His face drained of color, then flushed red, and she watched him cycle through emotions so fast she couldn't name them all. Finally, he looked at her, and there was nothing in his eyes she recognized. "You cannot be serious right now." Diana forced herself to speak through the tightness in her throat. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you just got engaged to Celeste, and I never meant for this to happen, but it did. And I need you to understand that this baby is real, and I'm keeping it, and we need to figure out what we're going to do together." The words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and unpolished, nothing like the speech she had rehearsed. Drew picked up the test between two fingers like it was contaminated and dropped it in the trash can beside his desk. The gesture was so casual, so utterly devoid of emotion, that Diana felt something crack inside her chest. "You need to handle this," he said, his voice flat. Quietly, Diana stepped back like he had struck her. "Handle this? Drew, this is our baby." "No." He moved around the desk, his presence suddenly overwhelming in a way that felt threatening rather than intimate. "This is your problem. I made my position clear from the beginning. We had an arrangement, Diana. It was fun, it was convenient, but it was never going anywhere. You knew that." She shook her head, disbelieving. This was the man who had whispered promises into her skin, who had made her believe she was more than just his assistant. "You said you loved me. You said Celeste was just a business arrangement and that what we had was real." Drew laughed, and the sound shredded whatever remained of her dignity. "Jesus Christ, did you actually believe that? Diana, look at yourself. Look at who you are and who I am. Did you really think this was some fairy tale?" The cruelty in his voice was surgical, precise, designed to cut deep. Diana felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. "I thought you were different," she whispered. "I thought you saw me as more than just the help." The help. He repeated the words thoughtfully, like he was tasting them. "You know what? That's exactly what you are. You bring me coffee. You schedule my meetings. You were a distraction when I needed one. That's all this ever was." Diana's hands moved to her stomach instinctively, protectively. "I'm pregnant with your child. That's not nothing." Drew walked to his desk and pulled out his checkbook. The scratch of pen on paper filled the silence between them. He tore the check free and held it out to her. $200,000. That's more than generous. Take care of it. Take some time off, and when you come back, we'll pretend this never happened. She stared at the check, at the numbers that were supposed to erase a life. "And if I don't take care of it?" His jaw tightened. "Then you're on your own. I'll deny everything. It'll be your word against mine, and we both know how that story ends. No one will believe the assistant who got too attached." Diana looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing a familiar face. Every moment they had shared, every whispered confession, every night she had believed they were building towards something real, all of it had been fiction. She had created a love story in her head, while he had simply been passing time. "You're nothing without me, Diana." His voice dropped lower, more vicious. "Look around. You think you got this job because of your qualifications? You think anyone else would hire you? You can't survive a day without me. Without this job, without my protection, you're nobody." The words hit her like physical blows, each one landing exactly where he meant them to. Diana felt herself shrinking, felt the weight of his contempt pressing her into the floor. But somewhere beneath the devastation, beneath the betrayal, something else stirred. Something harder than pain. She picked up the check, and for a moment Drew's expression shifted into relief. Then she tore it in half, and half again, and again, until confetti drifted onto his pristine carpet. His face transformed into something ugly, something she was glad she had never seen before today. "Get out," he said quietly. "Get out of my office, out of this building. You're fired." Diana walked to the door on legs that felt disconnected from her body. She paused at the threshold and turned back. "I will survive without you, and one day you're going to regret every word you just said." "I doubt that," Drew replied, already turning back to his window, dismissing her with his indifference. She walked through the corridor toward her desk, aware of every eye on her, every whispered conversation that stopped when she passed. They knew, of course they knew. Office gossip moved faster than elevators. She packed her personal items into a box, a framed photo of her mother, a potted succulent that had somehow survived her neglect, a coffee mug that said, "Nevertheless." She persisted. The irony made her want to laugh or scream or both. Someone touched her shoulder. Diana looked up to find Marcus from accounting. No, his name was Gerald. Gerald from accounting, looking at her with pity so thick it felt suffocating. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We all knew he was trash. Then why didn't anyone warn me?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Gerald had no answer. None of them did. They just watched as she carried her box to the elevator, a funeral procession of one. Drew stood at his office window 40 stories above, watching her emerge onto the street below. She looked so small from this height, insignificant, already fading from his memory. He had a board meeting to attend and a wedding to plan. Diana Sinclair would be forgotten by lunch. Diana walked to the subway station, the box growing heavier with each step. The morning rush had passed, leaving the platform nearly empty. She set the box down on a bench and pressed both hands to her stomach. A baby, a life that depended entirely on her ability to survive what had just happened. The enormity of it crashed over her in waves. The platform tilted, or maybe she did. Diana couldn't tell anymore. Heat flooded her face, followed by a cold so intense her teeth chattered. She tried to reach for the bench, tried to hold on, but her legs dissolved beneath her. The concrete rose up to meet her, and she registered pain and wetness spreading between her legs and the distant sound of someone screaming for help. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was the box of her belongings, tipped over, the succulent soil spilling across the platform like a promise of things that could not survive the fall. The city moved on above her, indifferent and eternal, while Diana Sinclair bled onto the subway platform. Nothing left between her and oblivion except the stubborn beating of 3 tiny hearts that refused to stop fighting. Chapter 2. The Survival. Diana opened her eyes to fluorescent lights that burned like accusations. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and failure, sterile white walls closing in around her like a tomb. Her body ached in places she didn't know could hurt, and when she tried to sit up, a hand pressed gently against her shoulder. A nurse with kind eyes and silver hair appeared in her vision. "Easy now. You've been through quite an ordeal." The memory rushed back. The platform, the blood, the darkness. Diana's hands flew to her stomach, panic clawing up her throat. "My baby! Please tell me my baby is okay." The nurse smiled, but there was something complicated in that smile, something that made Diana's heart stutter. "Your babies are fine. All 3 of them." The world stopped spinning for a moment. 3? Triplets. "You're carrying triplets, sweetheart. They're fighters too. The doctors were worried about losing them, but they held on. You're about 12 weeks along, and it's going to be a difficult pregnancy, high risk. You'll need constant monitoring, bed rest in the later months, and a support system." The nurse paused, her eyes scanning Diana's bare ring finger, the absence of any emergency contact in her file. "Is there someone we can call for you?" Diana stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each one, focusing on anything except the crushing weight of her reality. 3 babies. 3 lives depending on her, no job. No home, not really. Her studio apartment cost more than she could afford without her salary. No family. Her mother had died when she was 16, and there had never been anyone else. "No," she whispered. "There's no one." The nurse squeezed her hand. "Well, you're not alone anymore. You've got 3 reasons to fight." They kept her for 2 days, monitoring the babies, running tests that revealed just how precarious this pregnancy would be. Diana lay in that hospital bed and did calculations that never came out right. Her savings account held $3,000. Rent was $1,800 a month. Food, utilities, prenatal vitamins, doctor visits. The numbers didn't work no matter how many times she rearranged them. She could survive maybe 2 months before she became one of those statistics. One of those women who disappeared into the cracks of a city that had no patience for failure. When they discharged her, Diana walked back to her apartment building with discharge papers clutched in one hand and a prescription she couldn't afford in the other. Her landlord, a man whose cruelty lived comfortably behind bureaucratic language, was waiting in the lobby. He handed her an eviction notice with the detachment of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. 30 days, he said, not meeting her eyes. "Building policy. You missed last month's rent, and I know you're not employed anymore. I'm sorry, but I have to protect my investment." Diana took the notice without arguing. What would be the point? She climbed the 4 flights to her apartment because the elevator was broken again, and she packed her life into 3 suitcases and 2 trash bags. Everything she owned fit into the trunk of a taxi. She gave the driver an address she had found online, a women's shelter in a neighborhood she had never visited, where the rent was whatever you could afford, and dignity was something you learned to live without. The shelter smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. Women of all ages filled the common room, some watching a television with broken sound, others sitting in silence with the particular stillness of people who had run out of places to run. Diana checked in with a social worker who barely looked up from her paperwork, assigned a bed in a room she would share with 5 other women, and was handed a schedule of mealtimes and curfews and rules that felt designed to remind her exactly how far she had fallen. Her roommates eyed her with suspicion at first. New arrivals were always suspect. You never knew who was running from what. But Diana kept to herself, spent her days searching for work that wouldn't hire a pregnant woman, and her nights lying awake, listening to the sounds of other women crying into their pillows. She learned quickly that the shelter had its own hierarchy, its own social structure built on who had been there longest and who had the most tragic story. Diana's pregnancy earned her a certain sympathy, but it was the pitying kind that made her want to scream. The rejection letters piled up. Every application she submitted came back with the same polite variations of, "We've decided to pursue other candidates." She knew why. Pregnant women were liabilities, not assets. They would need time off, would have doctor appointments, would eventually leave for maternity leave that most places refused to pay for. She was unemployable, and the money in her account dwindled with terrifying speed. One night, Diana sat in the shelter's computer room, staring at the screen with blurred vision. She had been searching job listings for hours, finding nothing, feeling the walls close in tighter. A woman shuffled in, elderly and bent with arthritis, her hands twisted into shapes that looked painful. She struggled with the mouse, cursing softly under her breath. "This damn thing never does what I want it to do," the woman muttered. Diana watched her struggle for a moment, then moved to help. "What are you trying to do?" "Apply for housing assistance. But these websites, they're not made for old hands like mine." She held up her fingers, showing Diana the swollen joints. "Everything's too small, too complicated." Diana looked at the screen, at the tiny buttons and convoluted navigation, and something clicked in her mind. She thought about her mother, who had struggled with similar problems before she died. She thought about all the people the digital world left behind because designers only thought about young, able-bodied users. An idea began forming, fragile and impossible, but it wouldn't let her go. "What's your name?" Diana asked. "Birdie. And before you ask, yes, like the animal. My mother had a sense of humor." The old woman smiled, and it transformed her face into something lovely. "You're the pregnant one. Diana, right? 3 babies. Lord have mercy." Diana helped Birdie navigate the website, explaining each step, making notes about what was confusing and what could be better. When they finished, Birdie patted her hand with her twisted fingers. "You're a good girl. Smart, too. You're going to make it out of here." "I don't see how," Diana admitted. "I can't get hired anywhere. I have 3 months before these babies need things I can't afford. I'm drowning and I don't know how to swim." Birdie looked at her with eyes that had seen too much to be shocked by anything. "Then you build yourself a boat. My daughter, she's a patent lawyer, does work for people who can't afford the big firms. She helps women who have good ideas but no money. You got any good ideas, Diana?" Diana thought about the website, about accessibility, about all the people the world forgot. "Maybe, I don't know. It's probably stupid. Stupid ideas are the only ones worth having. Smart ideas, everybody's already thought of them." Birdie pulled out a business card from her purse, worn and bent. "You call her. Tell her I sent you. And Diana, don't you dare give up on those babies. They're counting on you to be tougher than the world that broke you." That night, Diana lay in her assigned bed and stared at the business card in the darkness. She could feel the babies moving inside her now, tiny flutters that reminded her she wasn't alone anymore. She thought about Drew in his penthouse, probably sleeping peacefully beside his fiancée, already having forgotten her name. She thought about his words, "You're nothing without me. You can't survive a day without me." She placed both hands on her stomach and made a promise to the lives growing there. "I'm going to prove him wrong. I'm going to build something so big, so important, that his name will be nothing compared to ours. You're going to have everything. I don't know how yet, but I swear on every breath in my body, you're going to have everything." In the morning, Diana called the number on Birdie's card. She spent the next month sketching out her idea, learning to code through free online tutorials, sleeping 4 hours a night because that was all she could spare. She took a job as a night cleaner in office buildings, working from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, her body screaming in protest, but her mind razor-focused. During the day, she coded. She wrote algorithms that could predict user needs, that could adapt interfaces to different abilities. that could make the digital world accessible to people like Birdie. The other women in the shelter thought she was crazy, working herself to death while pregnant with triplets. But Diana had learned something in Drew's office that day. She had learned that the only person she could ever truly depend on was herself. So she became her own foundation, her own support system, her own reason to survive. Her belly swelled as the weeks passed. Birdie's daughter helped her file the patent paperwork, working for a percentage of future profits because Diana had no money to pay her. The software began taking shape, lines of code transforming into something real and useful and potentially revolutionary. Diana tested it on Birdie, refined it based on feedback, added features she hadn't initially considered. At night, when her body was too exhausted to continue and her mind was too wired to sleep, Diana would pull out her phone and look at Drew's social media. She saw photos of his engagement party, his vacation to the Bahamas, his life continuing exactly as it had before she existed. In some photos, she could see the window of his office in the background, the place where he had destroyed her. Each image fueled something dark and determined inside her chest. She was 28 weeks pregnant when she finished the first working prototype of her software. 28 weeks pregnant and living in a shelter and cleaning toilets for minimum wage. But she had built something that could change lives. Birdie cried when she used it, said it was like someone had finally built a door where there had only been walls. Diana saved every penny from her cleaning job. She ate the cheapest food the shelter provided. She wore donated maternity clothes that never quite fit. She became invisible in every way, except the one that mattered. Her code was brilliant, and she knew it. The contractions started early one morning while she was mopping floors in an empty office building. Diana tried to breathe through them, tried to finish her shift because she needed every dollar. But the pain intensified, sharp and unrelenting, and she knew something was wrong. She called an ambulance, then she called Birdie, because there was no one else. Birdie found her on the bathroom floor of an office building, surrounded by cleaning supplies and broken water. 3 babies trying to enter a world that had no room for them yet. Chapter 3. The Empire. The penthouse windows stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a view of the city that had once tried to swallow Diana whole. Now she stood above it, a queen surveying a kingdom she had built from ash and fury. The skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, and somewhere down there, in one of those anonymous buildings, Drew Thurman was living a life that no longer intersected with hers. The thought should have brought satisfaction, but Diana felt only the hollow absence where emotions used to live. "Mommy, come see what we made!" Diana turned from the window to find Sedona racing toward her, paint splattered and grinning. Behind her, Odessa and Sydney followed at a more cautious pace, identical in their careful approach to the world. The girls were mirrors of each other in appearance, but galaxies apart in temperament. Sedona was fire and impulse, Odessa was calculation and protection, and Sydney existed somewhere in between, a bridge between her sisters' extremes. Diana knelt down, mindless of her tailored suit, and examined the painting they had created. Abstract swirls of color that could have been anything or nothing, the kind of art that only made sense through a child's eyes. "This is magnificent. Tell me about it." "It's a family," Sedona explained, pointing to 3 small figures surrounded by wild brushstrokes. "That's us, and the colors are all the people who love us. See how big it is? That's Grandma Catherine and Birdie and Miss Roxanne and all the people at your company and everyone who makes our world safe." Diana's throat tightened. The painting had no figure that could represent a father. The girls had never asked about their origin story, the way some children obsessed over missing pieces. They seemed complete in their universe of women who had chosen them, protected them, celebrated them. Diana had worried for years that they would feel the absence, but instead they had built something whole from what she had given them. "It's perfect," Diana said, kissing each of their foreheads in turn. "Now go wash up. Miss Birdie is coming for dinner, and you know how she feels about paint-covered hugs." The girls scattered toward their bathroom, their laughter echoing through the converted warehouse that Diana had transformed into a home. Exposed brick and soaring ceilings, art supplies scattered in organized chaos, a life built on intention rather than convention. Everything here was chosen, nothing was inherited. And that distinction mattered more than luxury ever could. Diana's assistant appeared in the doorway, a young woman named Zara who worshipped efficiency and never asked unnecessary questions. "The board meeting is in 30 minutes. Your car is ready, and I've sent the presentation files to your tablet. Also, Thurman Industries reached out again. Third time this month. They want a meeting to discuss collaboration opportunities." "Same answer as always," Diana replied, her voice neutral. "We're not interested. They're offering a significant partnership deal. The money would fast-track the international expansion we've been planning." Diana pulled on her jacket, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She looked like power now, all sharp edges and controlled beauty. Nothing soft remained except when she looked at her daughters. "Thurman Industries can offer us the moon, and I still wouldn't collaborate with them. Tell them we're pursuing other opportunities and to stop wasting everyone's time." Zara nodded, making notes on her tablet. "I'll send the standard rejection. Also, the Century Gala confirmed your attendance. They've listed you as a featured speaker alongside the keynote. Apparently, there's significant interest in hearing about your work." The Century Gala. Diana had received the invitation weeks ago and had nearly declined. She didn't need validation from the same circles that had once ignored her. But her board had pushed, explaining that visibility at this level would attract investors, would cement her reputation, would prove that Sinclair Adaptive Technologies wasn't just successful but essential. So she had agreed, professional obligation overriding personal preference. "Who's giving the keynote?" Diana asked, though some instinct already knew the answer. "Drew Thurman. He's being honored for his family's charitable foundation contributions." Zara's voice carried careful neutrality, the tone of someone who knew there was history but would never presume to ask about it. Diana felt nothing. That was progress, she supposed. There had been a time when his name alone would have triggered rage or grief or some complicated mixture of both. Now there was only the flat recognition of a person who had once mattered and no longer did. "Fine. Make sure my dress is pressed and my speech is loaded. I'll attend, network appropriately, and leave early." The girls have school the next morning. She arrived at her office building, a modest space compared to the glass towers around it, but it was theirs. Every brick, every desk, every line of code belonged to a company she had built without compromising her principles. Her employees loved working here because Diana treated them like humans rather than resources. She paid living wages, offered unlimited parental leave, and created a culture where people's lives mattered more than quarterly profits. The board meeting focused on expansion strategies. Diana's software had been adopted by 3 major technology companies, each paying substantial licensing fees. Schools were implementing it for students with disabilities. Hospitals used it to help patients navigate complex medical systems. The impact was measurable and growing, and Diana felt pride in what they had accomplished without selling their souls to corporations who viewed accessibility as an afterthought. After the meeting, Diana stopped by Birdie's apartment, a bright space filled with plants and photographs spanning decades. Birdie was in her kitchen, making her famous cornbread, her twisted hands moving with practiced efficiency despite the arthritis. "Those babies ready for dinner?" Birdie asked, pulling Diana into a hug that smelled like vanilla and home. "They're excited. Sedona made you a painting that she insists is a masterpiece." Birdie laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "That child has your determination. All 3 of them do. They're going to change the world, Diana, just like their mother." Diana helped set the table, grateful for the ritual of normalcy. Birdie had become the grandmother her daughters needed, the elder who told stories and offered wisdom and loved unconditionally. She had been there the night Diana went into early labor, had held her hand during the terrifying delivery, had helped name 3 tiny babies who were born too soon but determined to survive. "I got invited to the Century Gala," Diana said, arranging silverware with meticulous precision. "Drew Thurman is the keynote speaker." Bertie's hand stilled. "And how do you feel about that?" "I don't feel anything." "Is that wrong? Should I still be angry? Should I want revenge? I just feel empty when I think about him." "Empty is honest," Bertie said quietly. "Anger would mean he still has power over you. Indifference means you've moved beyond him." "That's victory, baby girl. That's freedom." But freedom felt strangely hollow. Diana had imagined this moment for years, the moment when she would stand in the same room as Drew Thurman and feel nothing but contempt. Now that it was approaching, she felt only tired. Tired of carrying the weight of what had been done to her. Tired of defining herself in opposition to a man who probably rarely thought of her at all. The night of the gala arrived with relentless inevitability. Diana stood in her bedroom, looking at the gold dress her stylist had selected. It was stunning, all flowing silk and strategic cutouts, designed to make her look like living flame. She almost chose something else, something more subdued, but then she remembered Drew's words, "You're nothing without me." She put on the gold dress. She painted her lips the color of revenge. She wore her success like armor. The ballroom was everything she expected: crystal chandeliers and orchestral music, people who measured worth in zeros and influence in connections. Diana moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations on her company's success, discussing potential collaborations with investors who suddenly found her interesting. She was surrounded by admirers, and the irony wasn't lost on her. These same people had ignored her when she was Drew's assistant, had looked through her like she was transparent. Now they wanted pieces of her attention like it was currency. Then she saw him across the ballroom, and time performed strange gymnastics. Drew Thurman, older but essentially unchanged, wearing his privilege like a second skin. He was laughing at something a board member said, champagne glass raised in a toast, utterly comfortable in his element. Diana watched him, this man who had destroyed and dismissed her, and waited to feel something violent. Instead, she felt only curious detachment, like examining a specimen under glass. Their eyes met across the distance. Drew's smile froze. His champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the marble floor in an explosion of crystal and sparkling wine. The sound, cut through conversation, drew attention, created the kind of scene Drew would normally avoid at all costs. But he couldn't look away from her. Diana held his gaze for a long moment, then deliberately turned to the man beside her and laughed at something he said, her attention gifted elsewhere. Throughout the evening, Diana felt Drew's eyes tracking her movements. She gave her speech about accessibility and technology's moral obligations, and she saw him standing in the back, watching with an expression she couldn't read. When people approached to praise her work, she noticed Drew hovering at the edges, trying to find an opening to speak with her. She made sure there was never an opening. Leon Hayes, her business partner and closest colleague, appeared at her elbow with fresh champagne. "You're torturing him. It's delicious to watch." Diana accepted the glass, allowing herself a small smile. "I'm not torturing anyone. I'm simply existing in the same space. It's not my fault if he finds that uncomfortable. He's been trying to corner you for the past hour. What do you want to do when he succeeds?" "He won't succeed," Diana replied. "I'm leaving in 10 minutes. The girls need me home for bedtime stories." But Drew moved faster than she anticipated. As Diana headed toward the coat check, he intercepted her by the balcony doors, his presence suddenly overwhelming in a way that triggered cellular memory of what it felt like to be powerless. "Diana, please, can we talk?" She looked at him with eyes that gave nothing away. "I don't believe we have anything to discuss. I need to apologize for what I said, for how I treated you. I've thought about it every day for years, and I need you to know that I was wrong." Diana studied him, this man who had once held all the power. He looked desperate now, hungry for something she would never give him. I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't require your apology. What you did is irrelevant to who I am now. Your company is incredible. What you've built, it's more impressive than anything I've ever accomplished. Yes, Diana agreed simply. It is. Drew flinched at her directness. I deserve that. I deserve your contempt, but I've changed. I'm not the same person who said those things to you. Maybe you have changed. Maybe you haven't. Either way, it doesn't concern me. Diana moved to step past him, but he caught her arm gently. Do you have children? I thought I saw you mention daughters in an interview. Diana extracted her arm from his grasp with deliberate care. My personal life is not your business. It never was. She left him standing on the balcony, confusion and something that looked like grief written across his face. As her car pulled away from the venue, Diana looked back once and saw Drew silhouetted in the doorway, watching her disappear into the night. She felt a strange satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge. She had survived him. She had built something beautiful from the ruins he left. That was enough. But later, as she tucked her daughters into bed and listened to their breathing even out into sleep, Diana found herself standing at the window of their room, staring out at the city. Somewhere out there, Drew Thurman was probably going home to his wife, to his comfortable life, to a world that had never challenged him the way it had challenged her. And for the first time in years, Diana wondered what it would be like to let go of indifference and actually feel something about him again. Not love, never love, but perhaps the complicated truth that people could haunt you even after you stopped believing in ghosts. Chapter 4. The Recognition. Drew couldn't breathe properly. The sensation had started the moment he saw Diana across the ballroom and hadn't stopped, even now, hours later, sitting in his study with expensive whiskey that tasted like ash. His wife, Celeste, was asleep upstairs, or pretending to be, which amounted to the same thing in their marriage. They occupied the same house the way strangers shared elevator space, proximity without connection. He pulled up Diana's company website on his laptop, studying her biography, the interviews where she discussed her work with passionate eloquence. She spoke about accessibility like some people spoke about religion, with the fervor of someone who had discovered purpose. The photographs showed a woman transformed, not just physically but fundamentally. The Diana he had known had been soft around the edges, apologetic in her existence. This Diana looked like she could start fires with her gaze. The investigation report sat in his desk drawer, but Drew didn't need to open it. He had memorized every word. Diana Sinclair, founder and CEO of Sinclair Adaptive Technologies. Net worth $47 million. Residential address in Brooklyn. And the detail that had stopped his heart. 3 daughters, Sedona, Odessa, and Sydney. Born premature, spent weeks in intensive care, but survived against odds that should have destroyed them. Drew did the math compulsively, even though he knew where it led. The timing aligned perfectly with the day he had thrown her out of his office, the day he had told her to handle it quietly. She hadn't handled it the way he demanded. She had kept them. 3 children he had paid her to erase, now existed in the world, breathing and growing, and entirely unknown to him. He picked up his phone, scrolled to Leon Hayes' contact information. Leon was Diana's business partner, and according to social media, someone who clearly adored her. The photos showed them at company events, at dinners, Leon looking at Diana with an expression that Drew recognized because he had once looked at her the same way. The jealousy that surged through him was irrational and unwelcome. He had no claim to her. He had forfeited that right when he chose cruelty over courage. Drew called his private investigator instead. I need confirmation on something. The children. I need to know for certain if they're mine. The investigator's voice was professionally neutral. DNA confirmation would require either cooperation from Ms. Sinclair or a court order. Without either, I can only provide circumstantial evidence. But the timeline, the fact that she had no other relationships, the timing of the premature birth, it all points to the same conclusion. Get me more information. Their school, their routines, anything that helps me understand their lives. Mr. Thurman, I have to advise against this course of action. Legally speaking, surveillance of minors without parental consent can be problematic. And Ms. Sinclair has an excellent legal team. If she discovers you're investigating her children, it could create significant complications. Drew ended the call. He didn't need an investigator to tell him what his bones already knew. Those children were his. He had 3 daughters who didn't know his name, who had grown up without any part of him, who existed as living proof of his cowardice. The next morning, Drew stood outside Sinclair Adaptive Technologies, watching employees filter into the building. The headquarters were modest compared to his family's empire, but there was something authentic about the space. People smiled as they entered. They lingered in conversation, rather than rushing to prove their importance. It looked like a place where humans worked, rather than where machines pretended to be human. He asked his assistant to schedule a meeting with Diana. The response came back within an hour. Ms. Sinclair was not available for meetings with Thurman Industries representatives. When Drew called personally, Zara answered with professional politeness that barely masked hostility. Mrs. Sinclair has made her position clear. Your companies are not aligned in their values or objectives, and she sees no benefit in collaboration. This isn't about business, Drew said. This is personal. Ms. Sinclair doesn't conduct personal meetings during business hours. If you have a private matter to discuss, I suggest you address it through appropriate legal channels. The rejection stung more than it should have. Drew found himself driving to Diana's neighborhood, parking outside the building where she lived. He wasn't sure what he hoped to accomplish. Perhaps he just needed to see the life she had built, to confirm that she had survived despite his certainty that she couldn't. He waited for 3 hours before they emerged. Diana walked down the street, holding the hands of 2 small girls, while a third skipped ahead, all of them bundled in colorful coats against the autumn chill. Drew's breath caught. They were beautiful. They had Diana's eyes, her graceful way of moving, but they also had his dark hair, his strong jawline. The genetic signature was undeniable. Sedona, he guessed it was Sedona based on her bold energy, pointed at something in a shop window, and Diana knelt down to explain whatever had caught her daughter's attention. The tenderness in that gesture destroyed something in Drew's chest. He had missed this. Not just moments, but years of moments. First steps and first words, and every tiny miracle that marked a child's growth. He had chosen to miss it all because he was too frightened to imagine himself as a father. Diana stood suddenly, her eyes scanning the street with the alertness of prey, sensing a predator. She saw his car, saw him watching, and her expression transformed into fury so pure it was almost beautiful. She said something sharp to the girls, who immediately stopped playing and moved closer to her sides. Then she marched toward his car with the force of an approaching storm. Drew rolled down his window, his prepared speech evaporating under the heat of her anger. "You're following us now? You're watching my children? Do you have any idea how disturbing that is?" Diana's voice was low and controlled, but underneath was rage that could level cities. "I needed to see them. I needed to know if they were mine. They're not yours. They belong to themselves, and partially to me because I've earned that privilege. You're a stranger who shares some genetic material. That doesn't make you a father." One of the girls, the smallest one, tugged on Diana's coat. "Mommy, who's that man?" Diana's face softened immediately when she looked down. "Nobody important, Sydney. Just someone who's confused about boundaries. Let's go get hot chocolate." The casual dismissal was more devastating than any insult could have been. Drew watched them walk away, heard the girls' laughter float back on the wind, and understood with terrible clarity what he had lost. Not just Diana, though that loss was significant. He had lost the possibility of being someone worth knowing. That evening, Drew hired the most aggressive family lawyer in the state. He arrived at the man's office with documentation, with evidence, with demands that felt righteous in his anger and desperation. "I want custody rights, visitation at minimum. These are my daughters, and I deserve to know them." The lawyer, a man named Garrett Pembroke, who had a reputation for winning impossible cases, reviewed the documents with practiced efficiency. "This is complicated. You have a strong biological claim, assuming DNA testing confirms paternity. But you also have significant vulnerabilities. The payment you made to Miss Sinclair could be interpreted as an attempt to coerce termination. Your complete absence for years will be difficult to justify. And Miss Sinclair has created a stable, loving environment for these children. Family courts prioritize the children's best interests, not parental rights. So, what are you saying? That I have no recourse? I'm saying this will be an ugly battle and you might not win. Even if you do establish parental rights, the court might grant only supervised visitation. Miss Sinclair's legal team will argue that sudden introduction of a father figure could be psychologically damaging to children who have thrived without one. Drew left the meeting feeling hollow. He drove aimlessly through the city, past landmarks that had once meant something, past the building where he had destroyed the only honest relationship he'd ever had. When he finally went home, Celeste was waiting in the living room, glass of wine in hand, her expression carved from ice. The credit card bill came. $3,000 to a private investigator, $5,000 to Garrett Pembroke. She took a deliberate sip of wine. "Want to explain why you're investigating some woman and hiring the city's most expensive family lawyer?" Drew sank into a chair, exhausted by his own choices. "I have children. 3 daughters. I didn't know about them until recently." Celeste's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Of course you do. Let me guess, the assistant you were sleeping with. The one who disappeared so conveniently before our wedding. Her name is Diana. I don't care what her name is. What I care about is how this affects me. We have a reputation to maintain, my family's expectations, our social standing. You pursuing some bastard children is going to make us look pathetic." The word bastard ignited something violent in Drew's chest. "They're not bastards. They're my daughters, and you will not speak about them that way." "They're problems," Celeste corrected coldly, "and you need to decide what matters more, your sudden paternal urges or the life we've built together. Because I won't tolerate public humiliation. If you continue down this path, I'll file for divorce, and I'll make sure every gossip column in this city knows exactly what kind of man you are." Drew looked at his wife, this woman he had married for all the wrong reasons, and saw clearly for the first time how hollow their foundation had been. They had built nothing real together. They had created an appearance of partnership while remaining fundamentally alone. "File for divorce," he said quietly. "Because I'm not stopping. Those girls deserve better than what I gave them. They deserve better than having me continue to pretend they don't exist." Celeste threw her wine glass. It shattered against the wall behind Drew's head, red liquid dripping down expensive wallpaper like arterial spray. "You're throwing away everything for children who don't even know you exist? For some woman who clearly wants nothing to do with you?" "Yes," Drew said simply. "That's exactly what I'm doing." He left that night, checking into a hotel because he couldn't spend another hour in a house that had never felt like home. In the morning, he called Garrett Pembroke and told him to file the custody petition. He called his mother and explained the situation, heard her sharp intake of breath followed by a long silence. "I need to meet her," Catherine Thurman finally said. "This Diana. I need to understand what kind of woman raised my grandchildren without any help from my useless son." Drew provided Diana's contact information, then sat in his hotel room and waited for the inevitable explosion. Diana would be furious. She would fight him with everything she had. But at least the war would be honest. At least it would matter. He had spent years building an empire that meant nothing, and a marriage that was really just 2 people hiding from loneliness together. Now he had a chance to fight for something real, even if that fight meant losing everything else. Drew looked at the photos the investigator had provided, his daughters laughing, his daughters painting, his daughters being loved by a woman who had every reason to teach them to hate him. and he made a promise to himself that he would become someone worthy of eventually standing in the same photograph, even if it took the rest of his life. Chapter 5: The Battle. The custody petition arrived via courier on a Tuesday morning, while Diana was braiding Odessa's hair and Sedona was arguing about which shoes matched her dress. The mundane beauty of the moment shattered when she opened the envelope and saw Drew Thurman's name printed in formal legal text above demands for paternity testing and visitation rights. Her hands shook so violently that Sydney noticed. "Mommy, why do you look scared?" "You never look scared." Diana forced her expression into something neutral, something that wouldn't transfer her terror to her daughters. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. Just surprised by some grown-up paperwork. Go finish your breakfast. We need to leave for school soon." She waited until the girls were occupied before calling Roxanne Pierce, her lawyer, and the most formidable woman Diana had ever known. Roxanne answered on the first ring, her voice carrying the sharp efficiency of someone who had demolished stronger opponents than Drew Thurman. "He actually filed. I knew he would after the stalking incident, but I hoped he'd have enough sense to reconsider." Papers rustled in the background. "Don't worry. We've been preparing for this scenario since you told me about him. His case has more holes than advantages. He wants DNA testing. He wants to prove they're his, and then he wants access to them." Diana's voice cracked, despite her determination to stay composed. "Roxanne, I can't let him hurt them. I can't let him walk in and out of their lives the way he did with me. They're happy. They're whole. What if he destroys that? Maybe he won't. Because we're not going to let him near those girls until he proves he's capable of putting their needs before his guilt. This isn't about his right to redemption. This is about 3 children who have thrived without him and deserve protection from his sudden interest in playing father." The DNA testing happened in a sterile clinic where Drew and Diana sat on opposite sides of the waiting room, carefully not looking at each other. The girls had stayed with Birdie, spared the clinical reality of having their genetic makeup quantified and compared. A technician swabbed the inside of Drew's cheek with professional detachment, and Diana signed paperwork that felt like signing away some essential protection. Drew tried to speak to her as they left. "Diana, can we please talk about this like adults?" She kept walking, her heels clicking against the linoleum with the rhythm of rejection. "My lawyer will communicate with your lawyer. We have nothing to say to each other. They're my daughters. That has to mean something." Diana stopped, turned, and let him see the full weight of her contempt. "They stopped being your daughters the moment you called them a problem that needed handling. Biology doesn't make you a father. Biology just makes you a man who couldn't keep his conscience in his pants." The test results confirmed what everyone already knew. Paternity established with absolute certainty. Drew Thurman was the biological father of Sedona, Odessa, and Sydney Sinclair. The lawyers filed motions and counter-motions, building arguments from precedent and emotion, preparing for a battle that would dissect Diana's life and Drew's failures in front of a judge who would decide what qualified as best for the children. The media discovered the story with the inevitability of vultures finding carrion. Headlines screamed variations of Billionaire's secret children and tech CEO's hidden past. Photographers camped outside Diana's building, shouting questions at her daughters who didn't understand why strangers wanted their pictures. Diana hired security, rearranged their routines, and tried to shield them from a scandal that had nothing to do with their innocence and everything to do with adult failures. Sedona found a newspaper someone had left on a park bench. Diana tried to intercept it, but Sedona was too fast, too curious. She stared at the photo of Drew beneath a headline that called him her father, her small face scrunched in concentration. "Is this the man from the museum? The one who makes you angry?" Diana knelt in the grass, heedless of her white pants, and took her daughter's hands. "Yes, that's him. And he's angry at himself for missing so much of your life. So now he wants to be part of it." But just because someone wants something doesn't mean they automatically get it. Do you understand? Does he know how to braid hair? Because if he doesn't, I don't think he can be a daddy. Daddies should know important things. The logic was so pure, so childlike, that Diana almost laughed. No, sweetheart. I don't think he knows how to braid hair. Then what's the point of him? Diana had no answer that wouldn't poison her daughter's capacity for eventual forgiveness. She settled for honesty instead. Some people need time to learn how to be what they should have been from the beginning. Your father is one of those people, but we don't have to wait for him to figure it out. We're perfectly fine exactly as we are. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon. Diana wore navy blue because Roxanne said judges respected conservative colors, and she needed every possible advantage. Drew sat across the courtroom looking haggard, his expensive suit unable to hide the weight he had clearly lost. His lawyer, Garrett Pembroke, was exactly as vicious as his reputation promised. Pembroke argued that Drew had been denied knowledge of his children's existence, that Diana had deliberately kept them from him, that paternal rights superseded maternal convenience. He painted Diana as vindictive and Drew as a victim of circumstances beyond his control. The characterization was so absurd that Diana wanted to scream, but Roxanne had coached her extensively. Remain calm. Let the evidence speak. Don't give them emotional ammunition. Roxanne presented the check. The emails where Drew had referred to the pregnancy as the situation. Testimony from 3 former colleagues who confirmed Drew's language about Diana had been dismissive at best, degrading at worst. Phone records showing Drew had never attempted contact with Diana after her departure until the gala, years later. The evidence was damning, and Pembroke struggled to reframe abandonment as ignorance. The judge, a woman named Harriet Volkoff, with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing, listened without visible emotion. When both sides had presented their initial arguments, she leaned forward and addressed Drew directly. Mr. Thurman, help me understand your position. You acknowledge providing Ms. Sinclair with money to terminate the pregnancy. You acknowledge years of no contact. You acknowledge that your interest in these children began only after discovering their existence. So my question is simple. What changed? Why now? Drew stood, his voice rough with something that sounded like genuine pain. I changed, Your Honor. I saw what I had destroyed and what I had missed. I saw these incredible children who exist because Diana was braver than I ever was. And I realized that I've been living a coward's life, building wealth instead of meaning. I can't undo what I did. I can't give back the years I stole from them by my absence. But I can try to be better. I can try to earn a place in their lives, even if it's a small one. Judge Volkoff's expression didn't soften. And what makes you think these children need you? According to the evidence presented, they have a stable home, excellent care, and a mother who has provided everything without your financial or emotional support. Why should I disrupt that stability for your benefit? It's not for my benefit, or it shouldn't be. It's for theirs. Children deserve to know both parents, if both parents are willing to do the work of earning that relationship. Were you willing to do that work when you told Ms. Sinclair to handle the situation quietly? The question landed like a physical blow. Drew had no defense, and the silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, he spoke. No, Your Honor, I wasn't willing then. I was selfish and frightened and cruel. But people can change. People can learn to be what they should have been. And I'm asking for the chance to prove that I've learned. Judge Volkoff turned her attention to Diana. Ms. Sinclair, do you believe Mr. Thurman has changed? Diana stood, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. I don't know if he's changed, Your Honor. I stopped paying attention to what kind of man he was a long time ago. What I know is that my daughters are happy, healthy, and loved. What I know is that introducing instability into their lives to satisfy his guilt seems fundamentally wrong. If he wants to be a father, he needs to prove he understands that fatherhood is about putting their needs first, not about easing his conscience. And if he could prove that, would you be open to limited supervised contact? The question forced Diana to confront something she had been avoiding. Her anger at Drew was legitimate and earned, but was it fair to let that anger prevent her daughters from potentially knowing a father who might actually become worthy of the title? She thought about Sedona's question, what's the point of him? Maybe there wasn't a point, or maybe there could be if he was willing to do the work. If he could prove it, Diana said slowly, supervised visits. Not in my home, not disrupting their routines. And if he makes them feel unwanted or secondary or anything less than treasured, he loses that privilege permanently. Judge Volkov made notes, then announced she would reserve judgment pending further investigation. A guardian ad litem would be appointed to assess the situation and make recommendations. The girls would be interviewed, their environment evaluated, both parents' fitness examined. Drew's mother requested a meeting the following week. Catherine Thurman arrived at Roxanne's office in a chauffeured car, dressed in understated elegance that spoke of old money and older confidence. Diana had expected judgment or demands. Instead, Catherine sat across from her and apologized. My son is an idiot. I raised him with certain privileges that taught him the wrong lessons about value and disposability. I take responsibility for that failure. Catherine's voice carried the weight of decades spent navigating powerful men and their weaknesses. But despite his idiocy, those children are my grandchildren, and I would very much like to know them, if you'll permit it. Diana studied this woman who had everything Diana once aspired to have. Status, security, respect. Why should I trust you? You raised the man who tried to destroy me. I didn't say trust me. I said permit me the opportunity to earn your trust. There's a difference. Catherine pulled out photographs from her purse, old images of herself young and pregnant and alone. I was where you are once. Different circumstances, but the same essential story. A powerful man decided I wasn't worth the complication. Drew's father only married me because his family forced the issue, and he resented me for it every day of our marriage. I don't want my grandchildren to carry that same poison forward. The vulnerability in Catherine's admission was unexpected and disarming. Diana saw past the elegant exterior to the woman who had survived her own version of abandonment and had apparently learned compassion from the experience. I'll consider it, but understand that my daughter's well-being is the only factor that matters. If you use access to them to manipulate this custody situation or to advocate for your son, you'll lose the privilege. Catherine nodded. I wouldn't expect anything less. Drew needs to earn his place. I won't do that work for him. But I would like the chance to be the grandmother those girls deserve, completely separate from whatever relationship they eventually have with their father. Diana agreed to supervised meetings at Catherine's estate, neutral ground where the girls could explore and play without the weight of expectation. The first visit was cautious on all sides. Catherine prepared afternoon tea with child-appropriate treats, and she listened with genuine interest as Sedona explained her paintings, as Odessa described her favorite books, as Sydney demonstrated the magic tricks she was learning. Watching Catherine with her daughters, Diana felt something soften that had been rigid for years. Maybe redemption wasn't about Drew at all. Maybe it was about allowing good people into their orbit, even if those people happened to be related to someone who had caused harm. Maybe healing meant accepting help, accepting connection, accepting that family could be chosen rather than endured. On the drive home, Sedona asked if they could visit Grandma Catherine again. Diana glanced in the rearview mirror at her daughters' faces, open and happy, unmarred by adult complications. She said yes, and meant it, and tried not to think about how this small opening might eventually include a man who had once told her she was nothing, that she couldn't survive without him. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had survived. She had built an empire from ashes. And now, survival meant being strong enough to let pieces of the past back in. Not for her sake, but for 3 little girls who deserved every possible source of love, even the complicated kind. Chapter 6. The Fractures. Drew's world was dismantling itself in slow motion. The divorce proceedings with Celeste had become a spectacle of mutual destruction, with lawyers billing obscene hours to argue about furniture and artwork and who got which country club membership. She had followed through on her threat to leak the story, and gossip columns feasted on every detail. Society pages that once praised their marriage now speculated about his infidelity, his secret children, his apparent moral bankruptcy. Friends who had seemed solid disappeared when scandal became inconvenient. The board of Thurman Industries called an emergency meeting. Drew sat at the head of the conference table in his father's old chair and faced a room full of executives who looked at him with varying degrees of disappointment and calculation. His father Harrison watched from a wheelchair in the corner, recovering from the stroke that had left him partially paralyzed. His eyes still sharp enough to communicate disgust. "Your personal life is affecting company performance," said Gerard Whitfield, the chief financial officer who'd been angling for Drew's position since the beginning. "We've lost 3 major contracts because clients don't want the publicity. Stock prices have dropped 8%, and you're missing crucial meetings to attend family court hearings about children who don't even know you exist." Drew looked around the table at men who measured worth only in spreadsheets and market shares. "My children exist whether they know me or not. And yes, my focus has been divided, but the company is still profitable, still meeting projections, still viable." "Barely," Harrison rasped from his wheelchair, his speech slurred but his venom intact. "You're distracted, weak, letting some woman and her bastards dictate your priorities. They built this company when you were nothing, and now you're destroying it with your midlife crisis." Something inside Drew snapped cleanly, like a bone breaking after years of pressure. He stood, placing both hands flat on the table, and addressed his father with a calmness that felt like freedom. "You built this company on the backs of people you treated as disposable. You married my mother because your family forced you to take responsibility, and you made her pay for that forced accountability every single day. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval by becoming you, and now I realize that becoming you was the worst thing I ever aspired to." Harrison's face purpled with rage. "You ungrateful piece of—" "I'm grateful," Drew interrupted. "I'm grateful for the lesson. You taught me exactly who I don't want to be. You taught me that money without meaning is just numbers in an account, and that power without purpose is just the ability to hurt people efficiently. So thank you for that education. It cost me everything important, but at least I learned eventually." He turned to the board. "I'm taking a leave of absence. 6 months. Gerard can serve as acting CEO. If you want to remove me permanently, I won't fight it. But I'm not sacrificing my chance to know my daughters for quarterly earnings reports. I'm done choosing money over meaning." The room erupted in arguments, but Drew was already walking out. He passed his assistant's desk, told her to forward all urgent matters to Gerard, and took the elevator down 40 stories, feeling lighter than he had in years. His phone rang constantly, but he didn't answer. Let them figure it out. Let them run the company without him. He had more important work to do. He enrolled in a parenting class at a community center in a neighborhood he had never visited before. The instructor was a no-nonsense woman named Gloria, who had raised 6 children on a waitress's salary and had no patience for rich men seeking redemption. The other participants were recovering addicts, ex-convicts, divorced fathers trying to rebuild relationships with children who barely remembered them. Drew was the only one wearing a suit. "You think showing up here makes you special?" Gloria asked during the first session, her eyes pinning him like a specimen. "You think wanting to be a father entitles you to be one?" No, Drew said quietly. "I think I have to earn it. That's why I'm here." Over the following weeks, Gloria taught him things no business school had covered: how to listen without fixing, how to apologize without expecting forgiveness, how to put someone else's needs before your ego, how to show up consistently, not dramatically. The lessons were humbling and occasionally devastating. Drew realized how little he actually knew about being a decent human, let alone a father. He started volunteering at the children's hospital, where Diana's company had donated adaptive technology. Watching kids with cerebral palsy use her software to communicate, seeing blind children navigate digital spaces designed for their needs, Drew understood what Diana had built while he was counting money. She had created legacy. She had changed lives. She had mattered in ways his wealth never would. One afternoon, a little boy named Thomas showed Drew a poem he had written using Diana's interface. The words were simple but profound, expressing loneliness and hope in equal measure. Thomas's mother cried reading it, told Drew this was the first time her son had been able to express his inner world so clearly. The woman who made this software, she understands what it's like to be overlooked, the mother said. You can tell by how she designed it. She built it for people like my Tommy, people the world forgets about. Drew thought about Diana in the shelter, coding until her eyes burned, building something that would give voice to the voiceless. While he had been building monuments to his own importance, she had been creating actual meaning. The contrast devastated him. Catherine invited Diana and the girls to Sunday dinner at her estate. Drew wasn't invited, and the exclusion was justified but still painful. He spent those Sundays volunteering, trying to fill the hours with purpose, trying to become someone who might eventually deserve to sit at that table. His therapist, a woman named Dr. Reeves, who specialized in men unpacking toxic family patterns, asked him difficult questions about his childhood. What did your father teach you about love? And Drew considered the question carefully. He taught me that love is control, that vulnerability is weakness, that women are either trophies you display or threats you eliminate. He taught me that feelings are inconvenient and that real men build empires instead of relationships. And how's that working out for you? The question was rhetorical, but Drew answered anyway. It destroyed everything worth having. I became exactly what he trained me to be, and it cost me the only real thing I ever had. So what do you want to become instead? Drew had no immediate answer. He had spent so long performing a version of masculinity that he didn't know what authentic manhood looked like. Over the following sessions, he began unpacking decades of conditioning. The belief that his worth was tied to his net worth, the assumption that relationships were transactions, the terror of emotional exposure that had driven every cruel choice. Leon Hayes, Diana's business partner, proposed to her at a company dinner. Drew learned about it through social media, a public proposal with photographers, and a ring that probably cost less than Drew spent on a weekend getaway, but meant infinitely more because it came from genuine affection. He saw Diana's face in the photographs, saw her shock and something that looked like panic, and he felt a savage hope he had no right to feel. The next day, news broke that Diana had declined the proposal. Leon left the company amicably, and Drew felt relief so intense it shamed him. He had no claim to Diana's romantic life. He had forfeited that possibility when he told her she was nothing. But some primitive part of him celebrated that she remained unattached, as if that meant he still had a chance at something he couldn't even name. He wrote her a letter, not an email, not a text, but an actual letter written by hand on heavy paper. He explained things he had never articulated before, how his father's resentment had shaped his fear of fatherhood, how watching his mother endure a loveless marriage had taught him that commitment meant imprisonment, how cowardice was hereditary in his family, passed down like genetic disease. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just tried to be honest about the twisted logic that had guided his worst decisions. Diana never responded. Drew didn't expect her to, but writing it had mattered somehow, had forced him to confront truths he had been avoiding. He was terrified of becoming his father, so he had preemptively destroyed anything that might require him to be different. He had chosen isolation over risking failure, and in doing so, he had guaranteed both. Harrison's second stroke happened on a Wednesday evening. Drew received the call while he was at his parenting class, learning about consistent discipline strategies. He excused himself and drove to the hospital, arriving to find his mother sitting beside Harrison's bed, her face composed and distant. "Is he going to survive?" Drew asked. "They don't know yet. The damage is more extensive this time." Catherine looked at her husband with an expression Drew couldn't read. "He's been a difficult man to love. Did you ever love him? Actually love him?" Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I loved who I hoped he would become. And then I loved my life despite him. It's not the same as loving the man, but it's what I had." Harrison regained consciousness slowly, his speech even more impaired. Drew sat beside his bed, waiting for some deathbed revelation, some moment of paternal wisdom. Instead, Harrison grabbed his hand with surprising strength and rasped out words that confirmed everything Drew had been unpacking in therapy. "Don't let her trap you. Run while you still can. Women like that, they chain you with guilt and babies and expectations. I never loved your mother. Resented her every goddamn day. Don't make my mistake." Drew pulled his hand away, feeling something fundamental break free from its moorings. "Your mistake wasn't marrying my mother. Your mistake was resenting her for your own cowardice. Your mistake was teaching me that love is imprisonment instead of freedom. And I'm done inheriting your poison." He walked out of that hospital room and called Dr. Reeves. "I think I finally understand what I need to become. Not what my father wanted. Not even what Diana needs. Just what's actually decent and human and real." Catherine found him in the hospital cafeteria an hour later. She sat across from him, exhaustion etched into her elegant features. "I heard what he said to you, about me, about your responsibilities. I'm sorry he was cruel to you all those years. Don't apologize for him. He made his choices." Catherine reached across the table and squeezed Drew's hand. "But you're making different choices. I see you trying. I see you showing up to therapy and parenting classes and volunteer work. That matters, even if Diana never sees it. I'm not doing it for her to see. I'm doing it because I have to live with myself, and I can't keep being the person I was." Catherine smiled, sad and proud simultaneously. "That's growth. That's actual change. Your father never learned that lesson. He spent his whole life blaming everyone else for his unhappiness. You're taking responsibility instead. That's the difference between you and him." Drew drove home that night through streets that felt unfamiliar despite their geography. He had lived in this city his entire life, but had never really seen it. Now he noticed things: homeless encampments under overpasses, community gardens in vacant lots, people building lives from whatever materials they could find. He thought about Diana building her empire from a shelter, about children using her software to express what words alone couldn't capture, about Sedona asking if he knew how to braid hair. He didn't know how to braid hair. He didn't know how to be a father. He didn't know if he would ever earn the right to try. But he knew what he needed to do next. He needed to keep showing up, keep doing the work, keep becoming someone worth knowing, even if the only witness to that transformation was himself. Because change that depended on external validation wasn't real change. It was just another performance, another transaction, another way of being exactly what his father had taught him to be. Chapter 7. The Transformation. Diana stood in the conference room overlooking her company's modest headquarters, surrounded by the team she had built from refugees and believers. They were facing a hostile takeover attempt from Nexus Global, a conglomerate with unlimited resources and a reputation for acquiring innovative companies and stripping them for parts. The offer was aggressive, the timeline compressed, and her board was divided about whether to fight or surrender. "They're offering 3 times our current valuation," said Zara, always practical. "That's generational wealth for everyone at this table. We could sell and walk away as victors. Victors who let our technology become just another profit center for a company that doesn't care about accessibility," Diana countered. "Everything we've built, every principle we've stood for, would be diluted until it's meaningless." I'd rather go down fighting than watch them destroy what we created." The meeting dissolved into arguments, and Diana felt the weight of leadership in ways she hadn't since the early days. She was tired, bone deep, exhausted from fighting Drew's custody claims, from protecting her daughters, from maintaining her company's integrity while larger forces tried to consume it. For the first time since leaving Drew's office, Diana wondered if she had the strength to keep swimming against currents designed to drown people like her. Leon had taken a position at a competitor after she declined his proposal. He had been gracious about it, had told her he understood, but his absence left a gap in the company's leadership that no one had adequately filled. Diana realized too late that she had been using Leon as a shield, letting him carry emotional weight she refused to acknowledge. Now she was alone with the consequences. Drew heard about the takeover through business channels. Nexus Global's CEO was an acquaintance from boarding school, a man who collected companies the way some people collected art. Drew made calls, pulling in favors accumulated over decades, leveraging relationships he had once cultivated for profit towards something resembling purpose. He couldn't save Diana's company directly without making it worse, without her thinking he was trying to control or manipulate her. But he could work behind the scenes, could convince key board members at Nexus that this acquisition would damage their reputation more than enhance it. He spent political capital he would never recover. He burned bridges with people who valued loyalty above all else. He made himself unpopular in circles where popularity meant survival. And he did it without Diana's knowledge, without expectation of gratitude, because the point wasn't recognition. The point was doing what was right for once in his privileged life. The takeover attempt collapsed suddenly, mysteriously. Nexus Global withdrew their offer with vague language about strategic realignment and market conditions. Diana's lawyer Roxanne investigated, but found no clear explanation beyond backroom maneuvering that she couldn't trace. The company was saved, but Diana felt unsettled by the rescue's opacity. Meanwhile, the custody evaluation continued its methodical intrusion. The guardian ad litem, a kind woman named Patricia Alvarez, interviewed everyone in the girl's orbit. She spent afternoons at Diana's warehouse home, observing routines, assessing stability, taking notes with an expression that revealed nothing. She visited Catherine's estate during Sunday dinners, watching the girls interact with their grandmother. And eventually, she requested to meet Drew. The meeting happened in Patricia's office, neutral ground with toys scattered strategically to seem welcoming. Drew arrived early, nervous in ways he hadn't been since his first board presentation decades ago. Patricia studied him with the clinical precision of someone who had seen every variation of parental inadequacy. "Tell me why you want custody," she said without preamble. "I don't want custody. Not primary custody. I just want the chance to know them, to be someone they can count on, even if I'm not at the center of their lives." Patricia made notes. "You abandoned these children before they were born. You paid their mother to terminate the pregnancy. You missed every milestone, every moment. Why should I believe you're suddenly capable of putting their needs first?" Drew had prepared for this question, had rehearsed answers with his therapist. But in the moment, preparation felt inadequate. He spoke from instinct instead. "I shouldn't be believed. I should be tested. I should have to prove over months or years that I'm capable of showing up consistently. These girls deserve someone who chooses them deliberately, not someone who claims paternity as a right. I'm asking for the opportunity to earn their trust, knowing I might never succeed. But the trying matters. Being willing to fail at something important matters more than succeeding at things that don't." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. "You've been attending parenting classes, volunteering at the children's hospital, working with a therapist specializing in family reconciliation. Why? Because I don't know how to be a father, and I won't learn by demanding access and expecting instinct to carry me through. I need to understand what healthy parenting looks like before I can attempt it. And if Ms. Sinclair never forgives you, If these girls grow up never calling you Dad, will you still show up? The question cut to something essential. Drew considered it honestly. Yes, because this isn't about my redemption arc or my healing. This is about 3 children who deserve every possible source of support and love. If my role is peripheral, if I'm just the guy who sends birthday cards and shows up to school plays, that's still more than what I gave them by being absent. Patricia's expression softened slightly. Most men in your position want recognition. They want their pain acknowledged, their guilt absolved. You're the first one who seems to understand that none of this is about you. Drew left that meeting feeling neither hopeful nor defeated. He was simply committed to the process, whatever it yielded. He drove to the community center where his parenting class met and sat through Gloria's lecture about communication styles. The other men shared stories about reconnecting with their children, about small victories and crushing setbacks. Drew listened and learned that fatherhood was mostly showing up and hoping that consistency mattered more than perfection. After class, one of the other participants approached him. Marcus was a former addict who had lost custody of his daughter and was slowly rebuilding that relationship. "You're that billionaire everyone's talking about, right? The one with the secret kids?" Drew tensed, expecting judgment or solicitation. "Yes." "Must be weird, having money and still fucking up your life," Marcus laughed, not unkindly. "Makes the rest of us feel better about our disasters. Like money can't buy you out of being human." The observation was strangely comforting. Drew had spent his life believing money insulated him from consequences. Now he understood it just amplified them. He started showing up at the community center on weekends, helping set up for children's events. It wasn't strategic. He didn't expect Diana or the girls to witness his volunteerism. He simply needed to be useful, to contribute something beyond capital. The center served families struggling with poverty, addiction, instability, all the things Drew had never experienced but was beginning to understand from the periphery. One Saturday, he was assembling easels for a children's art show when someone small collided with his legs. Drew looked down to find Odessa staring up at him, her expression wary but curious. "You're the man from the museum, the one who watches us." Diana appeared immediately, her hand on Odessa's shoulder, her face transformed by protective fury. "We're leaving now." But Odessa didn't move. She kept studying Drew with the intensity children bring to solving mysteries. "Why do you watch us? Are you a stranger who does danger?" Drew knelt down to her eye level, careful to maintain distance. "I'm not trying to be scary. I'm sorry if I made you feel unsafe. I was trying to understand something about myself, but I went about it the wrong way." "What were you trying to understand?" Diana tried to interrupt, but Odessa shook off her mother's hand gently. She wanted an answer. Drew respected that determination, even as it terrified him. "I was trying to understand what it feels like to miss something important, to realize you threw away something precious because you were afraid." Odessa processed this with the seriousness of someone much older. "Miss Birdie says being afraid is okay, but letting fear make your choices is not okay. Is that what you did?" "Yes, that's exactly what I did, and I'm trying to learn how to make different choices now." Sydney and Sedona appeared then, flanking their sister like protective brackets. Diana's arms wrapped around all 3 of them, a physical barrier between Drew and his daughters. The girls looked at him with varying expressions, curiosity, wariness, confusion. Drew stood slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. "Diana, I wasn't following you. I've been volunteering here for weeks. I had no idea you would be here today. It's our neighborhood community center. Where else would we be on a Saturday?" Diana's voice carried exhaustion beneath the anger. "You need to understand something, Drew. Every time my daughters see you unexpectedly, it creates questions I'm not ready to answer. Every time you show up in our spaces, it reminds me that you're trying to push your way into lives you already rejected once." Sedona tugged on Diana's sleeve. "Mommy, he's the man from Grandma Catherine's photos. She showed us pictures of when she was young, and there was a little boy in some of them. That's him when he was little, right? Diana closed her eyes briefly, and Drew saw the weight of impossible choices crushing her. She had been so careful to let the girls build a relationship with Catherine without poisoning them against Drew. But Catherine's home was full of family photographs spanning generations, and children noticed things adults tried to hide. "Yes," Diana said quietly. "That's him. He's Grandma Catherine's son, which makes him connected to our family in complicated ways that we're still figuring out. Is he our daddy?" Odessa asked, the word hanging in the air like something fragile and dangerous. Diana knelt down, gathering her daughters close. "He's the man who helped make you, but being a daddy is more than that. It's about showing up and being safe and earning trust over time. We're still learning if he knows how to do those things." Drew felt tears burning behind his eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of his daughters during what should have been a casual encounter. "Your mother is right. I'm trying to learn how to be someone worthy of being your dad. But I have a lot to learn, and I might not be very good at it for a long time." Sedona, bold as always, stepped forward slightly. "Can you braid hair?" The question was so unexpected that Drew laughed, a sound halfway between amusement and grief. "No, I can't braid hair. I never learned." "Then you should learn," Sedona said pragmatically, "because braiding hair is important." Diana shepherded the girls away after that, but as they left, Sydney looked back over her shoulder and waved tentatively. Drew waved back, and the simple gesture felt like forgiveness he absolutely hadn't earned, but would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. Patricia Alvarez witnessed the entire exchange from across the room. She had been at the community center interviewing staff about their volunteer programs and had observed Drew's interaction with his daughters without him knowing she was there. She made detailed notes, including the fact that Drew had shown appropriate boundaries, had been honest without overwhelming the children, and had demonstrated awareness that this moment was about their comfort rather than his need for connection. Her report to the court would be thorough and balanced, but in that moment, watching Drew watch his daughters walk away, Patricia saw something she rarely encountered in custody cases. She saw a man genuinely trying to become better, not because the court required it, but because he had finally understood that some failures were too significant to leave unaddressed. Whether that transformation was enough remained to be seen, but the effort itself was remarkable. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Drew listed his penthouse for sale on a Tuesday morning, the same penthouse where he had destroyed Diana and their future. His real estate agent was horrified by the decision, explaining that he was selling at the worst possible time and would lose money on the transaction. Drew didn't care about the money. He couldn't live in that space anymore, couldn't walk past the desk where he had thrown away everything that mattered. The memories had metastasized into something toxic. He donated the proceeds to a foundation supporting single mothers building businesses. The donation was anonymous because he was learning that authentic change required no audience. His social circle reacted to the sale with confusion and concern. Why would he downgrade when his divorce settlement left him financially comfortable? Why would he choose a modest apartment in a neighborhood lacking prestige? The questions revealed how completely his old friends measured worth, and Drew realized these weren't actually his friends at all. They were people who had surrounded him because of what he represented, not who he was. His therapy sessions intensified. Dr. Reeves asked him to write letters to his younger self, to articulate what he wished someone had told him before he became the man who could dismiss a pregnant woman with casual cruelty. The exercise was devastating. Drew wrote to himself at 21, warning about the poison his father was teaching him. He wrote to himself at 30, begging him to choose differently. He wrote to the version of himself who had stood in that office and told Diana she was nothing. And the letter was mostly apologies for failures that hadn't happened yet, but were already inevitable given who he had become. "You're being too hard on yourself," Dr. Reeves observed during one session. "Self-flagellation isn't the same as growth. I destroyed a woman who loved me. I abandoned children who deserved better. How hard is too hard? When hard enough that you're paralyzed instead of moving forward, you've taken responsibility. You're doing the work. At some point, you need to forgive yourself enough to actually become the person you're trying to be." But forgiveness felt premature. Drew wasn't sure he deserved absolution when the people he had harmed were still dealing with consequences. His daughters didn't know his voice. Diana looked at him with empty eyes. Those were facts, not feelings, and they required ongoing atonement rather than self-forgiveness. The custody hearing resumed with Patricia Alvarez's report. She had spent months evaluating both parents, interviewing the children, assessing environments. Judge Volkov read through the document with careful attention, while Drew and Diana sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. The space between them filled with history. Neither could escape. Patricia took the stand and delivered her findings with professional precision. She described Diana's home as nurturing and stable, praised her parenting approach as balanced between structure and freedom, noted the extensive support system Diana had built. Then she turned to Drew's evaluation, and the room held its breath. "Mr. Thurman has demonstrated genuine commitment to personal growth. He's attended every parenting class, maintained consistent therapy, volunteered extensively with at-risk children. His transformation appears authentic rather than performative." Patricia paused, shuffling her notes. "However, transformation takes time. These children have thrived without him, and introducing paternal instability could be detrimental. My recommendation is supervised visitation on a graduated schedule, beginning with 1 hour every other week at a neutral location. If Mr. Thurman demonstrates consistency and the children express comfort, we can gradually expand access." Judge Volkov considered the recommendation thoughtfully. "Ms. Sinclair, what are your thoughts on this proposal?" Diana stood, her voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath. "If the court mandates supervised visitation, I'll comply. But I want protections in place. If my daughters express discomfort, if they show any signs of emotional distress, if Drew misses scheduled visits without legitimate emergency, his access ends permanently. These girls have never needed him before. I won't let him teach them to need him, only to disappoint them." "That's reasonable," Judge Volkov agreed. She turned to Drew. "Mr. Thurman, do you accept these conditions?" Drew stood, feeling the weight of his failures pressing down. "I accept them completely, and I want to add a condition to myself. If I miss a visit for any reason short of hospitalization, I voluntarily forfeit my parental rights. No excuses, no second chances beyond the first chance I don't deserve. These girls need to learn they can count on me, and I need accountability." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a commitment. It's the minimum commitment fatherhood requires. I've already failed at the maximum. I need to succeed at the minimum before I can be trusted with more." Judge Volkov granted the supervised visitation order with detailed guidelines. Visits would occur at Catherine's estate, with a court-appointed monitor present. The girls would be informed age-appropriately about Drew's role in their lives. Their comfort would be prioritized above all else. Diana left the courthouse feeling neither victorious nor defeated, just exhausted by years of fighting battles she never chose. Catherine offered to host the first visit the following weekend. She prepared her estate with careful thought, setting up activities the girls might enjoy, creating space that felt welcoming without being overwhelming. When Diana arrived with Sedona, Odessa, and Sydney, she found Drew already there, sitting quietly on a bench in the garden, looking like he might vomit from nervousness. The court monitor, a woman named Iris, who specialized in family reconciliation, gave Drew gentle guidance. "Let them approach you. Don't force interaction. Follow their lead." The girls clung to Diana initially, uncertain about this structured encounter with a man they had seen peripherally but never really known. Catherine distracted them with cookies and stories, creating comfort through familiarity. Eventually, Sedona's curiosity overpowered her wariness. She approached Drew with the boldness that defined her. "Grandma Catherine says you used to live here when you were little. Did you have a treehouse?" Drew's voice came out rougher than intended. "I did. It's probably still in the big oak tree. Do you want to see it?" Sedona looked back at Diana, who nodded permission. The four of them, Drew, Sedona, Odessa, and Sydney, walked toward the massive tree with Iris following at a discreet distance. The treehouse was weathered but structurally sound, filled with childhood artifacts Drew had forgotten existed. Old toys and books and drawings from a time before his father's resentment had poisoned everything. "Did you draw these?" Odessa asked, examining a child's sketch of a rocket ship. "I did. I wanted to be an astronaut. I thought space would be quieter than home." The girls processed this confession with the seriousness children bring to adult vulnerability. Sydney, the quietest of the three, spoke for the first time. "Our home is loud, but it's good loud. Mommy lets us sing even when we're bad at it." Drew laughed, the sound genuine and unguarded. "Your mom is good at making people feel safe, even when they're bad at things." They spent the hour exploring the treehouse, with Drew answering questions and telling stories from his childhood. He was careful not to overstep, not to presume affection, not to make promises he wasn't certain he could keep. When the hour ended, Sedona hugged him briefly, a spontaneous gesture that nearly destroyed his composure. Odessa waved solemnly. Sydney just smiled, shy but not frightened. Diana watched from the garden, her arms crossed protectively, her expression unreadable. When Drew walked back toward her, she didn't move away, but didn't soften either. "They liked you," she said quietly. "Don't make me regret allowing this." "I won't. I'll show up every single time. I'll be boringly consistent. I'll be so reliable they get annoyed by my predictability." "Words are easy, Drew. You've said pretty words before." "I know. That's why I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to watch what I do and judge me on that instead." The visits became routine over the following months. Every other week, Drew arrived at Catherine's estate exactly on time. He brought age-appropriate books instead of expensive toys. He learned their interests without trying to buy their affection. He listened more than he spoke. Slowly, incrementally, the girls began to relax around him. They started sharing their artwork, their school stories, their jokes that made sense only to them. Roxanne discovered the connection between Drew and the collapsed takeover attempt. She confronted Diana with evidence she had finally pieced together: phone records, meeting notes, correspondence between Drew and Nexus Global board members. Drew had torpedoed his own business relationships to protect Diana's company, and he had never mentioned it. "Why would he do that without telling you?" Roxanne asked. "That's millions of dollars in lost future business for him. Those relationships were valuable, and he burned them without claiming credit." Diana stared at the evidence, unsettled by this revelation. The Drew she had known would have demanded recognition, would have used the rescue to manipulate her gratitude. This version had simply done what needed doing and walked away. It didn't align with the man who had destroyed her, and the cognitive dissonance was exhausting. She confronted him after the next visit. "Why did you sabotage the Nexus deal for my company?" Drew looked genuinely surprised that she knew. "How did you find out?" "That's not an answer. Why did you do it?" "Because they would have destroyed everything you built, and you built something that matters more than profit margins. It was the right thing to do, but you didn't tell me. You didn't use it as leverage or proof of your transformation." "Why?" Drew met her eyes with uncomfortable honesty. "Because doing the right thing to earn recognition isn't actually doing the right thing. It's just another transaction. I helped because your work deserves protection, not because I wanted credit for protecting it." Diana felt something shift in her chest, some small piece of the armor she had worn for years, developing a crack. Not forgiveness, not trust, but perhaps the acknowledgement that people could surprise you, even people who had already shown you their worst selves. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving my company, and for not making me owe you for it." "You don't owe me anything. If anything, I owe you several lifetimes of apologies and support. Helping with one hostile takeover doesn't even begin to balance those scales." That night, Diana lay awake in her converted warehouse, listening to her daughters sleep in the next room. She thought about Drew in the treehouse, patiently answering questions, respecting boundaries, showing up consistently for months without demanding acceleration. She thought about the man who had told her she was nothing and couldn't survive without him. Those men seemed like different people occupying the same history. Birdie had told her once that forgiveness wasn't about absolving someone else's guilt. It was about releasing the weight of carrying their failures in your heart. Diana wasn't ready to release that weight completely, but maybe she could start redistributing it. Maybe she could acknowledge that transformation was possible without erasing the harm that came before. Maybe healing meant holding both truths simultaneously. Drew had destroyed her, and Drew was trying desperately to become better. The complexity was uncomfortable, but felt more honest than the clean narrative of perpetual victimhood or complete absolution. Reality lived in the messy middle, where people were capable of both devastation and redemption, where hurt could coexist with hope, where the past informed the present without completely dictating the future. Chapter 9. The Offering. Diana's company received an acquisition offer that changed everything. Not a hostile takeover this time, but a genuine partnership proposal from a coalition of disability rights organizations and ethical tech investors. They wanted to expand Sinclair Adaptive Technologies globally while maintaining its core mission and values. The money was substantial, the terms were favorable, and the deal would allow Diana to scale her impact exponentially. It was everything she had worked toward. The validation that her principles and profits weren't mutually exclusive. But accepting meant travel. International negotiations, months of transition during which she would be stretched impossibly thin. Her daughters were starting a crucial school year. Sedona was struggling with anxiety that required consistent routine. Odessa had been selected for an advanced reading program that demanded parental involvement. Sydney was finally coming out of her shell socially and needed encouragement. Diana sat at her kitchen table at 3 a.m, surrounded by contract proposals, unable to reconcile the professional opportunity with her maternal responsibilities. Zara found her there when she arrived for their morning meeting. "You haven't slept. I can't figure out how to do both. If I take this deal, I'm choosing my company over my daughters. If I turn it down, I'm limiting what we can accomplish and potentially hurting everyone who depends on our technology. There's no right answer. Maybe there's no perfect answer, but there are support systems. You've built a village around those girls. Let the village help." Diana knew Zara was right, but accepting help felt like admitting failure. She had survived alone for so long that independence had calcified into identity. Letting people carry pieces of her burden meant trusting they wouldn't drop what they held. And trust was a currency Diana had long since exhausted. Drew's next visit happened on a day when Diana was barely holding herself together. She arrived at Catherine's estate with the girls, her exhaustion visible in every movement. Catherine pulled her aside while Iris supervised the children greeting Drew in the garden. "You look destroyed. What's happening?" Diana explained about the acquisition offer, about the impossible choice between professional achievement and maternal presence. Catherine listened with the attention of someone who had navigated similar conflicts, who understood the particular burden of being a woman expected to excel without needing support. "What does Drew's schedule look like?" Catherine asked thoughtfully. "What does that have to do with anything?" "He's on indefinite leave from his company. He's been building his entire life around these supervised visits." He shows up 2 hours early every time because he's terrified of being late. What if you expanded his access? Not as a gift to him, but as a practical solution to your childcare problem. Diana's instinct was to reject the suggestion immediately. Giving Drew more access felt like surrendering ground she had fought to defend. But Catherine's logic was sound, and Diana was too exhausted to maintain defensive positions out of pure stubbornness. "I'll think about it." That afternoon, Diana asked Drew to stay after the visit ended. He looked nervous, probably expecting criticism or new restrictions. Instead, Diana laid out her situation with brutal honesty. "I have a business opportunity that requires significant time and travel. My daughters need consistency and support. I'm going to ask you something, and if you say yes, I need you to understand it's not about you earning forgiveness or proving yourself. It's about my daughters needing care and you being available to provide it." Drew nodded slowly. "What do you need?" "Boo. I need help with school pickups, with homework supervision, with being present for the daily routines that keep their lives stable. It would be more time with them, but under my terms and with my oversight. If you fail them even once, you lose everything. Do you understand?" "I understand. When do you need me to start?" "Next week. I'll provide you with their schedules, their preferences, their routines. You'll work with Birdie and Catherine, not independently. The girls' comfort comes first, second, and third. Your needs don't make the list." Drew agreed without hesitation, and Diana felt simultaneous relief and terror. She was giving him opportunities to integrate into her daughters' lives, which meant giving him opportunities to hurt them. But she was also choosing to trust her instincts about his transformation rather than remaining paralyzed by his history. The expansion of Drew's access was gradual but consistent. He picked the girls up from school 3 times a week, taking them to the park or the library before bringing them home. He helped with homework, learning each daughter's particular academic strengths and struggles. He attended Sedona's therapy appointments as a supportive presence, sitting quietly while she worked through her anxiety with a counselor. He showed up to Odessa's reading program presentations and Sydney's art class exhibitions. The girls began referring to him as Drew rather than that man or grandma's son. It wasn't father or dad, and Drew never pushed for those titles. He seemed content to exist in whatever role they assigned him, grateful for proximity rather than demanding intimacy. Diana watched this evolution with complicated emotions. Seeing Drew braid Sedona's hair with the careful attention of someone who had watched tutorial videos repeatedly triggered memories of the man who had insisted she was nothing. But that man had also told her she couldn't survive without him, and she had built an empire that proved him wrong. Maybe people could contain multitudes. Maybe someone could be both the worst thing that ever happened to you and someone trying desperately to become better. The international deal progressed. Diana traveled to conferences in Geneva and Tokyo, negotiating terms that would protect her company's mission while expanding its reach. She called her daughters every night, sometimes finding Drew in the background, making dinner or helping with bath time. The domesticity of these scenes was jarring but no longer felt threatening. Birdie had opinions about the situation, as she always did. "That man is trying so hard, he's practically vibrating with effort. But trying isn't the same as arriving. You know that, right?" "I know. But he's been consistent for almost a year now. That has to mean something. It means he's capable of showing up when someone's watching. The real test is who he is when no one's keeping score. The test came unexpectedly. Diana was overseas when Sydney fell at school and needed stitches. The school called Drew because he was listed as emergency contact, and he had to make split-second decisions about medical care without Diana's input. He took Sydney to the hospital, held her hand through the stitches, handled the paperwork, called Diana immediately after to explain what happened and apologize for having to make medical decisions without her consent. Diana listened to his explanation, heard Sydney's voice in the background saying Drew had been brave for her when she was scared, and felt something fundamental shift. This was what fatherhood actually looked like. Showing up in emergencies, making difficult decisions, prioritizing a child's needs over your own comfort. Drew had done all of that without seeking credit or turning it into evidence of his worthiness. When Diana returned home, she found Drew had organized the other parents in Sydney's class to sign a card and send flowers. He had documented everything for Diana's records, had followed up with Sydney's doctor about scar care, had checked in with the school about playground safety. The attention to detail and follow-through impressed her more than grand gestures ever could. "Thank you for taking care of her," Diana said during their next exchange of the children. "I didn't do anything special. I did what any parent would do." "Exactly. You showed up like a parent. That's the first time I've thought of you that way." Drew's expression revealed how much those words meant to him, but he didn't make a production of the moment. "They're easy to show up for. Your daughters are remarkable people, Diana. You built that. Everything good about them comes from you. They have your determination, your intelligence. Those parts are genetic. The genetic parts are just raw material. You shaped them into actual humans with values and kindness and strength. That's all you." The acknowledgement of Diana's work, without Drew trying to claim credit or insert himself into the origin story, felt like a form of respect she hadn't anticipated. He was learning to honor her role rather than minimize it in pursuit of his own validation. Catherine's estate became neutral ground where their unconventional family took shape. Sunday dinners expanded to include not just Catherine, Diana, and the girls, but also Birdie, Roxanne, and occasionally Dr. Reeves, who had become a friend through the therapeutic process. Drew participated without presuming centrality. He set tables and cleared dishes and engaged in conversation without dominating it. One evening, after the girls had gone to play in Catherine's garden and the adults lingered over coffee, Roxanne turned to Drew with a question that had clearly been brewing. "Why are you really doing this? And don't give me the redemption speech. What's the actual motivation beneath the performance?" Drew considered the question carefully. "I'm doing it because watching them exist is the first time in my life I've felt like I'm witnessing something sacred. Not because they're mine biologically, but because they're proof that beauty can grow from devastation. Diana took my worst decision and transformed it into 3 extraordinary people. Being peripheral to that miracle is more meaningful than anything I've built in 40 years of self-importance." The answer satisfied Roxanne, but it also satisfied something in Diana. He wasn't performing redemption for an audience. He was genuinely humbled by proximity to something he hadn't earned and might never deserve. That humility felt authentic in ways his earlier apologies hadn't. The girls started asking if Drew could stay for dinner instead of leaving after school pickups. Diana considered the request carefully before agreeing to occasional dinners at her warehouse home. The first time Drew sat at her table, eating spaghetti and listening to Sedona explain her interpretation of a painting she had made, Diana felt the surreal weight of parallel timelines. In one timeline, they were a family from the beginning. In this timeline, they were fragments of people trying to build something functional from what remained. Sedona fell asleep on the couch after dinner, and Drew carried her to bed without being asked. He knew which bedroom was hers, knew that she slept with 3 stuffed animals arranged in specific order, knew to leave the hallway light on because she was afraid of complete darkness. The accumulation of knowledge about his daughters' lives was evidence of attention rather than intrusion. After he left that night, Odessa asked Diana a question that had clearly been troubling her. "Is Drew becoming our real dad, or is he just practicing?" Diana knelt down, taking her daughter's hands. "He's becoming whatever kind of dad you need him to be. Not instead of everything we already have, but in addition to it. Our family doesn't look like other families, but that doesn't make it less real. It just makes it ours. I think I want him to be real," Odessa admitted quietly. But I'm scared he'll disappear if we start counting on him. That's a very wise fear. And I promise you, if he disappears, we'll be okay. We've always been okay, just the four of us. Adding him to our family doesn't make us more complete. It just makes our family bigger. The reassurance seemed to comfort Odessa, but it also revealed the stakes of what Diana had allowed. Her daughters were beginning to attach to Drew, to integrate him into their understanding of family. If he failed them now, the damage would be exponentially worse than if she had never permitted access at all. Diana had gambled their emotional safety on Drew's transformation, and the magnitude of that risk kept her awake most nights. But Drew kept showing up. Week after week, month after month, he demonstrated reliability that slowly eroded Diana's skepticism. He wasn't perfect. He occasionally struggled with Sedona's anxiety triggers, didn't always understand Sydney's quiet communication style, sometimes deferred too much to Diana instead of trusting his own parental instincts. But his imperfection felt human rather than inadequate. He was learning on the job, and his willingness to be visibly uncertain created safety rather than undermining it. Chapter 10. The Foundation. Diana stood in her warehouse kitchen, watching through the window as Drew taught the girls to ride bicycles in the courtyard below. Sedona had mastered it quickly, her fearlessness translating into immediate competence. Sydney wobbled but persisted, her determination outlasting her natural ability. Odessa held back, analyzing the mechanics before attempting, her caution protecting her from falls, but also from progress. Drew adjusted his approach for each daughter, celebrating Sedona's boldness while providing patient reassurance to the others. It had been 18 months since the custody hearing. 18 months of Drew showing up consistently, of him integrating into their lives without demanding centrality, of him becoming someone the girls counted on without Diana having consciously decided to allow it. The transformation hadn't happened in dramatic moments, but in the accumulation of ordinary days. Homework help and school pickups. Birthday parties where he stayed in the background unless invited forward. Illnesses where he brought soup and sat quietly reading while they recovered. Birdie appeared beside Diana, her arthritis-twisted hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "You're thinking too loud. I can hear your thoughts from the other room. I'm thinking about whether forgiveness is something you give or something that just happens when you stop paying attention to not forgiving. That's the question, isn't it? You've been holding on to anger for so long that it's become part of your structure. What happens to a building when you remove a supporting beam?" Diana considered this. Either it collapses or it discovers it was strong enough without that support all along. And which one are you? "I don't know yet." Drew came upstairs with the girls, all of them flushed and laughing from the exertion. Sydney had scraped her knee in a minor fall, and Drew had cleaned and bandaged it with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned first aid specifically for this purpose. The girls scattered to their various activities. Sedona to her art supplies, Odessa to her books, Sydney to the puzzle she had been working on for days. Drew lingered by the door, uncertain whether he was invited to stay. Diana had never explicitly told him he was welcome in her home. His presence had just gradually become less intrusive, less challenging, less weighted with history. But the permission remained ambiguous, and Drew respected that ambiguity by never presuming. "Stay for dinner," Diana said, and the words felt less like invitation and more like acknowledgement of something already true. They cooked together with the awkward choreography of people learning to share space. Drew chopped vegetables while Diana managed the stove, and they moved around each other with careful awareness of boundaries. The girls set the table without being asked, a routine they had developed organically over months of these occasional shared meals. During dinner, Sedona announced she wanted Drew to come to her school's parent night, where students presented projects to their families. "All the other kids have 2 parents there, and I want 2 parents too. Mommy and Drew, is that okay?" Diana felt panic flutter in her chest. Parent night was a public declaration of their family structure, a visible claim on Drew's role that felt terrifying in its permanence. But Sedona's face was hopeful, and Diana had learned that her fear didn't get to dictate her daughter's needs. If Drew can make it, and if he wants to be there, that's fine. Drew's voice was thick with emotion. I want to be there. I'll be there. After dinner, while Drew helped the girls with bath time and bedtime routines, Diana called Roxanne. I think I'm going to drop the supervised visitation requirements. He's proven himself. He's been consistent for 18 months. The girls are comfortable with him. Keeping court-mandated oversight feels punitive at this point. Roxanne was quiet for a long moment. That's a big step. Are you sure you're ready? I don't know if I'm ready. But he's earned it, and my readiness isn't the point. This has to be about what's best for the girls, not about protecting my emotional comfort. Then file the motion. I'll draft the paperwork. But Diana, be clear about what you're doing. You're not just dropping supervision. You're accepting him as their father. That's permanent. Diana ended the call and found Drew reading to Sydney, his voice soft and steady as he performed different character voices for the story. Sydney was almost asleep, a small hand curled around Drew's finger. The image should have triggered resentment or fear, but Diana felt only tired acceptance. This was real now. Drew was their father, not because biology dictated it, but because he had done the work of becoming someone worthy of the title. When the girls were asleep, Diana and Drew sat in her living room with the uncomfortable distance of people who had once been intimate and were now something undefined. Diana poured 2 glasses of wine, a gesture that felt significant in its ordinary domesticity. I'm filing to end the supervised visitation requirements, she said without preamble. You've earned unsupervised access. You've proven you can be trusted with our daughters. Drew stared at his wine glass, his hands trembling slightly. Thank you. I know that costs you something to give. It's not a gift. It's acknowledgement of reality. You're their father, not instead of everything we've built, but in addition to it. I need you to understand that loving them means letting them love you too, even though that terrifies me. Why does it terrify you? Diana met his eyes for the first time in months without armor between them. Because if you hurt them the way you hurt me, I won't survive it. I rebuilt myself once from your destruction. If you make me watch you destroy them, there won't be anything left of me to rebuild again. Drew set down his wine glass and leaned forward, his expression raw with honesty. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise I won't make mistakes or occasionally fail them in small ways. But I can promise I will never make them feel disposable. I will never tell them they're nothing. I will never treat their love like it's a burden. Because watching you transform my worst decision into 3 extraordinary humans taught me that some miracles deserve protection, even from the person who set them in motion. You asked me once if I would ever forgive you, Diana said quietly. I told you forgiveness wasn't a gift I was ready to give. I'm still not ready. Maybe I never will be, but I'm willing to let you earn trust instead. Trust isn't the same as forgiveness, but it might be more valuable. Because trust is something you build through action, rather than something you receive through mercy. Drew nodded slowly. I'll take trust over forgiveness any day. Trust has to be maintained. It keeps me accountable in ways absolution wouldn't. They sat in silence for a while, drinking wine and watching the city lights through the warehouse windows. The quiet between them wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was honest. They were 2 people who had destroyed each other and were now trying to build something functional from the debris. Not romance, not friendship, but perhaps partnership in service of 3 children who deserved better than their origin story. The girls asked if you're their real dad, Diana said eventually. I told them you're becoming whatever kind of dad they need, but Odessa is scared you'll disappear. I won't disappear. I know that's just words right now, but I'll prove it through consistency. I'll be the most boring, reliable presence in their lives. They'll get annoyed by how predictably I show up. Diana almost smiled. They already complain that you're too careful on the playground. Sedona says you won't let them do anything fun, because your daughter thinks fun is climbing to the top of structures designed for children twice her age. She has no fear, which is beautiful and terrifying. She gets that from me. The fearlessness. I had to become fearless to survive after you. Drew absorbed this truth without deflecting. I made you fearless by making you face the worst and survive it. That's not a compliment to me. That's evidence of what you had to endure. Diana stood, collecting the wine glasses. I should sleep. You should go home. The girls have school tomorrow. Drew stood as well, moving toward the door. He paused at the threshold, the same place Diana had paused years ago after he had destroyed her. Thank you for letting me be part of their lives. I know I don't deserve it. Stop saying you don't deserve it. You've earned it through consistent action. That's how deserving works. You show up, you do the work, you prove yourself over time. You've done that. Own it instead of constantly apologizing for the past. Drew looked at her with something that might have been hope. Does that mean you see me differently now? Not as the man who hurt you, but as someone who learned to be better. Diana considered the question honestly. I see you as both. You're the man who told me I was nothing and couldn't survive without you. You're also the man who braids our daughter's hair and researches anxiety management techniques and shows up 2 hours early to every pickup because you're terrified of being late. Both versions exist. I'm learning to hold both truths simultaneously. That seems exhausting. It is. But it's also more honest than pretending the past didn't happen or that transformation erases harm. You can't undo what you did, but you can become someone who never does it again. Maybe that's the version of redemption that actually matters. Drew left that night without asking for more than Diana had offered. As his car pulled away, Diana stood at the window and watched the taillights disappear. She thought about the woman who had collapsed on a subway platform, bleeding and broken, 3 tiny heartbeats refusing to quit. She thought about that woman's journey from nothing to empire, from victim to architect of her own survival. Drew had been wrong. She had survived without him. She had built an empire without him. But now she was choosing to let him back in, not because she needed him, but because her daughters did. That distinction mattered. It was the difference between dependency and choice, between weakness and strength. As Diana climbed into bed, she heard Sedona call out from her room. "Mommy, is Drew really going to be at parent night?" Diana went to her daughter's bedside, smoothing hair from her forehead. "Yes, baby." "He'll be there." "Good. Because I made a painting about family and I put him in it. It would be weird if he wasn't there when I explained it." Diana's throat tightened. "What did you paint?" "Everyone who makes our world safe. You and me and Odessa and Sydney and Grandma Catherine and Bertie and Miss Roxanne and Drew. All the people who choose us even when they don't have to." The wisdom in her daughter's words broke something open in Diana's chest. Choosing each other even when you don't have to. That was the definition of family she had been searching for. Not blood, not obligation, but deliberate selection and consistent presence. That's a beautiful painting, sweetheart. I can't wait to see it. After Sedona fell back asleep, Diana returned to her own room and pulled out her laptop. She drafted an email to Drew, then deleted it. She drafted another version, then deleted that too. Finally, she wrote something simple and sent it before she could overthink the gesture. "Thank you for showing up. Keep showing up. That's all they need. That's all I need to believe this can work." Drew's response came 10 minutes later, just 3 words that felt more substantial than any declaration of love could have been. "I will. Always."